Let's get this show going. Well, first of all, in the excellent company of Spiked Online editor and social commentator Brendan O'Neill. Good morning, Brendan.
Hi, Kevin.
I wanted to sort of do a general thing with you. We've had a terrible year, clearly. I don't think we need to dwell on the obvious downsides of what we've been through, the lockdowns, the tears, the circuit breakers, the fire breakers, the destruction of the economy. And by the way, none of these measures seem to have worked. I'm not quite sure why we keep locking down when it's proved that all the other lockdowns didn't work. But that seems to be a function of this government's strange madness. But what worries me, Brendan, is under the radar of these huge changes to the way we've been living, to this coronavirus crisis, which has been such a profound changer of our life, of our society, of our freedoms. Things have been happening almost under the radar, and I think that the most worrying thing that happened in this past year has been the rise of wokery. And what I want you to do is to look forward to this time next year. Do you think, we'll cover a number of subjects, but do you think that wokery will have been defeated by this year, or at least that the sensible people of this country will have fought back against it?
That's the big question. I mean, I'm generally an optimist, but the reason I'm a little bit pessimistic about that particular issue is because in 2020, we were facing one of the most serious health crises of recent times. We thought that people would pull together and work together and act as a society, act as a broader community. But in fact, what actually happened is that the divisive ideology of wokeness got worse and worse and worse. And it really exploded with the Black Lives Matter protests after the brutal killing of George Floyd. And what we had in the wake of those protests was the most hysterical display of wokeness we've ever had. We had people banning old comedy shows because they were supposedly offensive. We had people pulling down statues or putting graffiti on statues. We had museums like the British Museum, the British Library, and others basically self-flagellating themselves for their ancient links to slavery. I mean, it really was an orgy of self-hatred and wokeness and divisiveness. And if that can happen in 2020, when we're all meant to pull together in the face of a serious problem, then I'm pretty sure it could happen in 2021 too. So I'm a tiny bit worried, to be honest.
Yeah, I am too. But what I would like the government to do, let's give it a bit of a break over the past year. It has had some massive issues to deal with and to be preoccupied by. Given that perhaps the next year might not be quite so pressing in terms of coronavirus, and certainly not in terms of getting the Brexit deal done, could this Tory administration raise its game and get to grips with this wokery problem? Because it should not have been a Conservative administration that allowed the rise of this madness. As you say, this used to be a serious country. It is not serious to start blaming people who live now for something that their ancestors did 350 years ago. It is not serious to throw statues into the sea because this person was a slave trader and rather a philanthropist, by the way, a person who helped Bristol insofar as he could. And it is not serious for our museums to start removing artifacts because they are linked to the slave trade. This is all the action of a shallow and mad country. We didn't used to be like this, and the Tories should not have let this happen to us. Can we retrieve our common sense and our seriousness?
We need to. I mean, that's the key point that needs to be made. I'm really surprised, as you say, that this happened under a Conservative government. To a certain extent, they allowed it to happen, or at least they weren't as forthright during the hysteria of wokeness over the past few months. They weren't as forthright as they might have been in defending British traditions, defending British history, defending British values, and sending a signal that we will not tolerate this screeching, hysterical, censorious culture that really comes from the kind of media elites and radical leftists and other sections of the kind of political class. That's the signal they should have sent. And I think what the Conservative Party doesn't seem to realise is that they would make themselves very popular if they
Yes.
were to criticise this craziness, if they were to criticise the excesses of gender fluidity, the idea that you can click your fingers and change sex, if they were to criticize the notion that all of British history is just a litany of crimes, one horror after another, if they were to criticize the idea that Britain is a horrible, racist country and no one should take pride in it, if they were to criticize those things, those ideas, they would win a lot of support among particularly red wall voters, those former Labour voters who gave their support to the Tory party this year, in December. They would win the support of all of those people and many others too. So they need some bravery, they need some backbone, they need to start facing down these divisive ideologies and putting Britain back on the straight and narrow.
Is it possible for the government to ban from our schools the teaching of critical race theory? This nonsense about telling little kids who happen to be white that although they don't think they're racist and although all their best friends are BAME people, they really are racist. And of course, this goes up to organisations like the BBC, which is currently telling all of its employees who are white that they are the beneficiaries of white privilege. This is a fact, according to the diversity director, June Sarpong, who gets 75 grand a year for doing 3 days a week. She has talked only 2 days ago about the problem of elite white males. Even working class white people have got a much better deal than the BAME community. And again, this preaching of racism, of prejudice, telling us all that you didn't think you were prejudiced, but you are. If it seeps into, if it infests an organisation like the BBC, and while we're at it, might as well throw the National Trust in with that and our museums, we are in trouble. We need to get rid of this nonsense, don't we? We need to get the BBC not to have a creative diversity director. We need the BBC not to come up with 55 pages of nonsense about why the BBC isn't diverse enough. I mean, it just so happens the BBC is incredibly undiverse, but the BBC should be concentrating on making good programs that people want to watch, not polishing its own halo about its own wonderfulness. Same goes for the National Trust. Just keep the houses nice so we can go and the stately homes so we can go and visit them. Don't bother, been sort of sainting yourself, becoming saints about your magnificent lack of racism and getting rid of it's nonsense. We need to do something about this, don't we?
Absolutely. And we have to do something about critical race theory, especially in schools. It is a toxic ideology because it is dividing kids. There was a racism problem in this country a few decades ago, and I'm sure, of course, racism still exists. But the story of this country is that it has become one of the least racist countries in the world. Black and white people and people from all backgrounds mix and work and educate themselves together every single day. And now what we have are these new elites going into schools, going into universities, going into public institutions and saying, listen, white people, you're all racist, even if you think you're not. Listen, black people, you're all victims and everyone hates you and everything else. And it's dividing people. It's saying that blacks and whites will never truly understand each other because their experiences are too different. That is a divisive, hyper-racial ideology. And someone like June Sarpong actually sums up the problem with this culture, because here's a woman, an accomplished broadcaster who now works at the BBC, who gets paid, as you say, 75,000 a year for 3 days a week of work. And she is saying even to working class white people and poor white people, she is saying, even you have privilege. So this is a woman who lives a very nice life on a wage that is paid for by us. Poor white people face criminal sanction if they don't pay their TV license and they own a TV. They pay her wages. She turns around and says to them, you are privileged and you need to educate yourselves. This is like a new form of feudalism. We have this feudalistic class of people who are looking down their noses at ordinary people, calling them privileged, calling them racist, calling them backward, essentially. This can't go on. I think it is so insulting and so demeaning. We need a country that pulls together as part of a national project rather than this divisive politics of identity.
Yeah, she's June has just released her third book. Sounds like a real page turner. I couldn't pick it up. It's called "The Power of Privilege: How White People Can Challenge Racism." She spoke about the power imbalances in our riven society and said the thing about modern privilege is that you're the beneficiary. If you're the beneficiary, often you're unaware that you're the beneficiary, and that's the whole point, isn't it? Because the default is white, and everything that isn't is other. I mean, this thinking is just moronic, and it is a massive problem. The people have to rise up against this, because you and I have discussed this before, Brendan. There is no doubt that 99.9999% of the population of Britain think the same as us about this wokery, that it is a pernicious nonsense and they want nothing of it. And yet the minority, the very small minority, the noisy minority, are calling all the shots and dictating what's happened. Corporations quake in their boots rather than offend Extinction Rebellion, and so on and so forth. We need the government to get behind the people, to stand up and to stop all this nonsense, because it's insane, and as I said earlier, it is making us less of a serious country.
That's right. It's an elitist ideology. It is not shared by the vast majority of people in this country. And when June Sarpong talks about in her new book, which will be about how white people can save themselves, essentially, improve yourselves, lift yourselves up. There's so many books and educational courses now devoted to fixing white people. Apparently, white people have these ingrained problems. They're all racist. They're all horrible. They're all problematic people. And that used to be said about black people. What the racists used to say in the old days is there's a problem with black people. They have these internal problems. We need to save them. We need to fix them. We need to improve them. If someone can explain to me how it is progressive to go from racializing black people, which I think was repugnant, to now racializing white people and saying they are the problem, they are the cause of every ill in our society, white men in particular, they are behind every bad thing that happens. If someone can explain to me how it's progressive to go from one form of racialism to another, I'd be very happy to hear that. The truth is, this demonization of white people is just disgusting. The majority of people in this country are white. The majority of them are not racist. And white working class kids are doing fairly badly at the moment in the educational system. Loads of people in this country, white and black, have lost their jobs in 2020 as a result of the lockdowns. What we need is people coming together, especially working class people, to improve their conditions in life. We don't need lectures from pampered people at the BBC about how privileged we all are. That's really the last thing this country needs right now.
This is another quote from June. She says, I think that the minute many white people understand that, and what she's talking about, understand that we are the problem, that we white people, they stand up and they say, this is June, my God, I never knew. I want to be part of the solution. This is an insanity that has to stop. And really my last question, Brennan, is about the exclusion of the people. That's what's happened over the past year. This wokery, the province of the elite, the people who get 75 grand a year for working 3 days doing a non-job at the BBC, those kind of people, they have been able to impose all their North London liberal wokist ideas on the population, while the population has been sort of suppressed. We've been cut out, and nowhere is that more evident than in the world of football. No fan I know wants to see the players take the knee every match for Black Lives Matter, and yet they carry on. Every fan has made it known they don't want to see this anymore. It's silly, it's empty, it achieves nothing, and yet the football authorities basically say we don't care about the normal public, the ordinary public, the people who pay our wages, the people who come and watch us play football. We don't care what they think. We're going to do what we think. And that is what I think the government has to stand up for this year, is to say, no. Brexit disgracefully took 4 years to do. It was and the that delay was about suppressing what people, the ordinary people, actually wanted and voted for. And we've got this going on everywhere at the moment, particularly in football with the taking the knee. We need the government to get behind the people so the people can be listened to in this year.
That's right. And I think you're absolutely right. The story of 2020 has been the expulsion of ordinary people from the public sphere, from public debate, from public life. And that's one of the key reasons why these new divisive elitist groups could have such an impact on politics. And, you know, what happened when football fans were allowed back into the stadium for the first time? Of course, they registered their disapproval of the Black Lives Matter movement, not the idea that Black Lives Matter. They registered their disapproval of that divisive movement by booing. So that was a really heartening moment, in my view, of this year, because that represented the return of ordinary people, the return of common sense. The story of this country at the moment is the disconnect between what the chattering classes think and what ordinary people think. The chattering classes tend to be anti-Brexit, pro-woke. They believe everyone's racist and they think Britain is a horrible country. Ordinary people are in large part pro-Brexit. They believe in democracy. They don't want the politics of identity, and they think Britain is a pretty good country. Any party that speaks for that majority will do very well. And that's why some parties got to discover a backbone and do precisely that.
Well, Brendan, I want to thank you for all your help over the years. It's always been a privilege to talk to you, and let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's try and stay optimistic for a much better 2021. All the best, Brendan. Take care. Brendan O'Neill there, editor of Spiked Online, social commentator. Looking forward to what we all hope will be a vastly improved 2021. Let's face it, it couldn't be much worse than 2020.